Like, did Merck know that in that the car was going to be underweight? I guess my answer to that question is at the beginning of the race, no, they didn't, but they didn't know that they were going to go to a one-stop strategy. But I do think that by the time they ended the race,
They kind of knew.
um, they probably knew that we've just done a one-stop strategy. The tires are going to be much more worn
Lighter,
and
yeah.
much more
Yeah.
underweight than they would have been if we'd just done the standard strategy. Can
Oh,
we just
come
break
on.
this? Can we just break this down
I
quickly?
love how
Like,
you're defending every word they're saying just because they're your team. You would not give that
they're not
benefit
my
of doubt
team.
to anyone
They
else.
should have been allowed to do a strategy that eventually allowed him
Yes,
to win the
of
race.
course he should have. He should have. And of course Lewis should feel that way. I think that's really cheeky. I've told you this. Lewis Hamilton, Toto Wolff, all of these guys, they say things in the press that they know exactly what buttons they to push on. And because at that point, Lewis said, I don't think when he was asked that question, he was still going to inherit the win, right? But he was second at that point. He clearly let let people know how he felt. He knew what he was doing. And oh, by the way, I'm completely fine with it. I love that from athletes. I should say, like this is human feeling. Like we, I love it. So I have no beef with that idea.
Um,
I'm not gonna let McLaren off the hook for that.
no,
They got undercut not once but twice in the race. I mean,
yeah,
how do you not learn from the first time? Like,
yeah.
fine, you got undercut the first time. They should have been the one triggering the undercut the second time around. They were gonna go on the hard tire, more durable tire. Max only had mediums then, so I don't even understand what they're doing here. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tired F1 Pod. We are back, better than ever, coming to you right at the end of a very interesting, very exciting Belgian Grand Prix. And it was one of those races where you kind of had to be watching the whole time, and the race really kind of spiced up towards the end, something we all expected. But Ches, how are you doing, and how did you absorb the Grand Prix?
I am good. I watched it very, very late at night, and it was pretty exciting. Kept me on the edge of my seat. Normally, when I watch these races, if they're super dull, I will fall asleep. But not this time. It was one of those races, as you said, where there were multiple strategies going on, different cars at different on different strategies, um, and you never quite knew what was going to happen until all of the strategies converged in the final stint, and then you had that amazing showdown for the lead between three drivers. I thought it was really really fun to watch.
That was kind of amazing. And if you had to pick three drivers going into the race that would be down for that showdown, I don't think we would have picked those three drivers, right? Going into it really after qualifying. But I do want to before we get into the race itself, I do want to give a shout out to these rule sets, right? Because we in the past here have lamented on the idea of like, hey, these are not competitive races, and this season we started off thinking that it would really be a max sort of sort of championship trot throughout the year, but it's been anything but that. And guess what? We get another year of this at least next year. It looks like until
I hope
until the
so.
rule sets again. So
We know how the whole thing ended up. Lewis is on a two-stop strategy, which seemed like it was probably going to be the better way to go. You had much fresher tires on a track where usually you're able to overtake, versus George Russell, who after he saw what everybody ahead of him was doing and was cycled up to the front,
hmm.
felt like, actually, maybe these tires feel pretty good. So I'm just gonna carry on and do a one stopper, and it on the track worked out for him. Obviously, it then didn't. So my question, because this has come up a lot on social media, is was were Mercedes right to let George Russell do the one stop?
So yeah, I was going to get into this as we talked about Mercedes. I think they have to take this one on the chin, as Toto said, because this is totally their fault, right? I think again, in this situation, what they could have done is sort of straddle the middle, right? And look, George at that stage wanted to do a one stop. I don't think he thought a race win was possible up until the last three laps. And I think those last three laps did them in because the smarter thing to do, in my opinion, would have been to let Lewis pass. George could have been in his DRS, maybe not consumed as much fuel as he did, just trying to hard race for those last three laps, which, in Belgium, those three laps are the equivalent of maybe 6 or 8 laps anywhere else, right? So I think that had they not had that, what do you want to call it, a squabble or this whole idea of let them race, George could have at least been second, in
But
my opinion,
but
and
Ahmad,
that would we'd have thought going in.
but the fuel wasn't the issue, though, was it? They still had 2.8 liters of fuel at the end of the race when they only needed to
Well,
have
what about
one
plank
in their
wear though,
car.
right? The plank wear could have been a factor in there, right? And they knew
Uh,
that there was going to be no
yeah.
cool down lap, like that was a given in going into it. So they could have at
Yeah.
least, we know that
Okay.
plank wear is a thing. And by the way, this is not the first time a car has been disqualified. I mean, I'm not saying plank wear is a thing, but we know going back to Austin last year, both Lewis and Charles kind of suffered at the hands of that too. So
Okay. So what you're saying is that perhaps Mercedes knew at that point, maybe not at the
no, they
beginning
didn't
of the
know that.
race,
They didn't know
but
that.
yeah, okay.
They didn't know that,
But
but they could have been. Look, they got greedy at the end. I mean,
so that is what happened. Yeah.
this is not a racetrack thing, but I think this is a little bit of a karma thing. I kind of want to say that because I think you saw. And let me call them out on this. Like, what is this idiotic thing that they keep saying? We let the drivers race. Hello, Valtteri, this is James. Like, what are you talking about? They didn't let them race. Like, that's not been the case.
Why should they not have let them race in that situation?
They shouldn't have let them race in that situation because they could have thrown away a 1-2. And again, look, we're
But they
playing the
didn't.
result. I know, but you're playing the result there, right? If Lewis wanted to be more racy, this could have ended up really, really badly for both of them. It didn't happen. I mean, Lewis kind of said himself, the team sort of asked me to hold back, right? And had he wanted to be more feisty about it, he could have, but he
But
didn't kind of do it. So,
well, they told him to be clean. Okay, can
oh,
we just
come
break
on.
this? Can we just break this down
I
quickly,
love how
right?
you're defending every word they're saying just because they're your team. You would not give that
They're not
benefit
my
of doubt
team.
to anyone else.
They're 100%
For
not my
now, they
team.
are, but next
But
year they'll
then
be this
no,
team, though.
they're not my team. I'm definitely not a Mercedes fan. But but there is an interesting argument to have here. So there's two sides to this. I think there's the one the legality of the whole thing. Like, did Merck know that in that the car was going to be underweight? I guess my answer to that question is at the beginning of the race, no, they didn't. But they didn't know that they were going to go to a one-stop strategy. But I do think that by the time they ended the race,
They kind of knew.
um, they probably knew that we've just done a one-stop strategy. The tires are going to be much more worn
Wider,
and
yeah.
much more
Yeah.
underweight than they would have been if we'd just done the standard strategy. So yeah,
Which
it's
is
great
why
that
they could have asked George to hold back a little bit. Like it could have been fine for him to be second or
yeah,
even third. Look, it was going to be a
yeah.
bonus for him, right?
Yeah, I
The
think the
only
answer
reason
to
they did that is because he had nothing to lose.
I agree. So I think they did
So,
get greedy. So
yeah.
there was definitely a bit of greed in there. I'll give you that. The second part of this was not so much the legality side of things, but the should George have been allowed to be on that strategy? We saw Lewis Hamilton get out the car at the end, and in the post-race conference, talk about, oh well, I told the team the tires felt great, but they kept telling me to come in, so I came in and I did a
Yeah,
two
but I
stop in, and
mean,
I saw my teammate
I
go
love
and
that.
win on the strategy that I wanted to win on. How do you feel about that?
Yeah,
Did
no.
should George have been allowed to do a strategy that eventually allowed him
Yes,
to win the
of
race?
course he should have. He should have. And of course Lewis should feel that way. I think that's really cheeky. I've told you this. Lewis Hamilton, Toto Wolff, all of these guys, they say things in the press that they know exactly what buttons they to push on. And because at that point, Lewis said, I don't think when he was asked that question, he was still going to inherit the win, right? But he was second at that point. He clearly let let people know how he felt. He knew what he was doing. And oh, by the way, I'm completely fine with it. I love that from athletes. I should say, like this is human feeling. Like I love it. So I have no beef with that idea. Should George have been on that strategy? Absolutely, because at that point, if I'm correct, when they were considering going to a one stop, I think he sort of called it or at least initiated it or whatever that might be. They had nothing to lose. He was P6, P7, thereabouts at that point. That's where he was going to end up. What was there to lose? I thought Carlos was going to do that. I really thought Carlos was going to do it. I thought Ferrari was going to do that with Carlos. And I thought, but we were not fast enough to do and we wouldn't have, kind of been there anyway. But I thought that was a brilliant thing. And I don't
So,
think it was predetermined though.
so isn't this just more evidence that Mercedes are just favoring George Russell?
They should. Yes, yes. And so what? At this point, they're more than halfway
Is
through the
it?
season. Yeah, so what? I mean, he's your guy moving forward. Like
Hmm.
you don't owe anything to Lewis Hamilton anymore. Like I don't understand. And by the way, all of you Lewis fans, I'm not being salty. I just think that that's business. I mean, Lewis made a decision, Mercedes made a decision. George is their guy moving forward, at least for 1 year. Now let's see what happens with Max and Kimi, but he might be on his way out next year. But for now, they should. And why not? And look, they clearly did that when they didn't allow Lewis to pass George. They clearly did that. And this thing came to bite them in the backside. Now, I don't know exactly how because there's been a lot of technicalities on the weight and stuff like that, tire wear, etc. But you can argue that had they held back George a little bit, had George been a little bit more conservative, and by the way, at that stage with the one stop, what are you really doing at racing Lewis at that point? Like clearly they should have let Lewis pass. They didn't. It kind of came to bite them, and it is what it is. I feel bad for George though. Let me just say this because he did nothing wrong. He pulled off a blinder. Like he was nowhere in the race, right? And then for the last 6 laps, we were watching as George and Lewis had it. They didn't even show Max and Charles and Lando for that last part of the race.
Yeah, look. So the way I digested all of this in time, like at the time that I was watching it was number one. I thought it was mental that George Russell was trying a one-stop strategy. But it was a Hail Mary, wasn't it? He was just doing something to try and get him further up the grid. So why the heck wouldn't you? And I think Mercedes have said this in their debrief as well, that the reason that George was allowed to do that was because he had nothing to lose at that point. He was going to end up fifth or sixth. And with this, he potentially could vault himself a bit further up the grid. I guess they didn't expect it to turn into a fight for the win, but a combination of low degradation on this newly surfaced track, the fact that the DRS had been shortened by 75 meters, and the fact that we're now in 2024 and not in 2022 meant that the cars don't follow quite as well. So overtaking wasn't quite as easy. I think was it Oscar on the radio who said free air is king?
Yeah,
And that
we'll come to
ultimately
that, but
was
yeah,
what won George Russell the race, wasn't it?
yeah.
Yes, he was brilliant on his tires, something that we've criticized him for before, but he wasn't the only driver out there who was able to
Well,
eke life out of those hard tires. But
look, it was going to be a flukish win, right? So the fact that he lost, they shouldn't be upset about it, to be honest. Like that they shouldn't be. Like it would have made a lot of people mad to see George win that race. At the same time, look, it just these things tend to happen. It's not a big deal. I mean, to me, it's like,
yeah,
but the one thing you can say about Mercedes and Red Bull too is they are excellent with pulling these decisions at the right time and right place. I don't know if this is a factor of them being super competitive for as long as they have been over the last decade, or instincts, or whatever it is. They managed to do this time and time and time and time again.
but it just felt like there was very clear communication from between the cockpit and the pit wall.
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
what we could hear on the radio, and certainly from what I've heard afterwards, there was a discussion back and forth for 3 laps, right? When Max was behind George just before he went in to pit. But what we heard on the radio was very much, I think we should go long. And the pit wall were like, you reckon you can do it? George was like, yeah, I reckon I can do it. And then
Well,
they
and
just did it.
And there was a lesson in there for Ferrari, by the way, because Charles was talking about going long too, and he could have had that strategy, by the way, that George did. It never came to fruition, but that was the one thing. And so this is why I think for me, if you're a Mercedes fan, you have to be happy with this race. You didn't walk into this weekend, certainly after practice, looking like you'd be anywhere close to a podium, let alone winning a race, right? And the very fact that they were able to do that with two cars, I was going to say, right? At least at least for the moment, like that's quite amazing. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess at the end of this, the takeaway for me is that number one, Lewis did drive a fantastic race,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Um, the way the start was brilliant. The way he held off Perez was brilliant. That probably let Charles get ahead, but I think he knew he had pace. He made overtakes when he needed to, and put himself in a position where actually the prime strategy was his. He was allowed to have the potentially better strategy, but he was undone by something that I think was unknown. Do I think that George Russell was just thinking about himself? Yes.
Of
Do I
course.
think that he was allowed to that he should be allowed to do that
Yes.
and that he was somehow
I don't.
prioritized? No, I
Yeah.
don't think so. I
What?
think he
No,
was
come
allowed to do
on.
what the heck.
So what? They prioritize
I
him.
think
So
I think he
what?
was allowed to do what he wanted. He had fine. He was in a position that was disadvantageous versus Lewis, but he dictated that strategy. He pushed the pit wall to let him do it. I think that's fair
It's not.
game
It's not the
ultimately.
strategy, Shez. I think it's the last 5 laps or whatever it was. That's when, to me, Mercedes got greedy, right? Because look, even if you didn't know exactly what the repercussions of a one stop would have been, it's fair to have taken the path of being a little bit more conservative towards the end. I think we can agree
Yeah,
on
I
that.
didn't have a problem. I didn't
And
have a problem
they
with
didn't
that.
want to do that, which is fine, which is fine. But they played with fire and they got burned, right?
Yeah, but
They
I think once I saw how it like Lewis wasn't catching by 1.5 seconds a lap. It was 7/10 a lap, right?
Yeah.
With sort of 10
Well,
to go, and he was
I
what
mean, George had tires
six
that were like super old too, so I mean the
exactly, but he
offset
was
was just
exactly.
crazy.
So you thought, oh, this is going to be quicker, but it never was. And then when they were getting close, and to Lewis is obviously looking behind at Oscar Piastri, he was asking that question, and he wasn't looking ahead because I don't think he thought that George was going to be a problem. Not because he thought I think that the team were necessarily going to move him aside, but just that he had the tires to overtake him. But I think in that moment when George found that actually he could keep Lewis behind and the overtake wasn't as easy as it looked like it was going to be before that point, I don't really have a problem with them letting them fight. Whatever, like if there's a chance, there's a chance. And ultimately, what Mercedes have gambled on, because I'm sure somebody would have known, look, our tires are going to be marginal at the end of this in terms of weight. That they gambled first. The dilemma they had was, do we let George win the race, but know that he's going to be underweight at the end of this, and just hope that we somehow pass scrutineering, or do we let Lewis through? And that would eventually have let Oscar through probably as well,
Still keep a podium.
and let George drop down the order a little bit. And yeah, maybe they got a little bit greedy and wanted the 1-2. And
They could have
it's
maintained
cost
a
them.
1-2. I mean, Lewis could have DRS George too. So I understand it's more tricky than that. But no, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think you can be upset. Like, look, they gambled. They have nothing to lose in a season where this is all bonus. I'm down for it. And I think as a fan, we were nobody had George Russell winning, right? No one had that on their bingo card. So that
And
was
nor
that
did
was
the
pretty
FIA
amazing.
by the sound of
No, did
things.
the FIA either. So there's that. So that was quite amazing. I'll take that every day, right? Especially if you're not in a position where, I mean, if you're competing for the championship, that's probably not a good idea that they did that, but they had nothing to lose. So I'm down. And I think that, and I'll just say this, that they can walk into the summer break feeling really, really good, probably the best amongst the top four teams about their chances moving forward. Because it, again, not too long ago, Bahrain, Melbourne, we were like, oh, this is going to Mercedes. Are they even going to finish ahead of Aston Martin, right? And here they are. They are legitimately, I will say this. I know that there's going to be one car that's quicker than the other, but I think Mercedes, McLaren, and Red Bull are within that margin of error. Like, yes, and this is going to be track specific, and there's going to be characteristics that suit one car or the other, but Mercedes have now shown that they can compete week in and out. I mean, Lewis
That's
had a
right.
podium in Hungary too, so this is not flukish anymore. The different tracks, and they're there, which is just amazing.
That's it. And Lewis Hamilton is now a multiple race winner in 2024.
There you go. Who had that
The
on their
only
mind?
one apart from Max Verstappen. Ha ha
That's
ha ha.
quite amazing. Look at you. Can we pivot to the other team in question? Let's go to Red Bull. What did you think of their race?
I think game of two halves again. Max did well to get to where he got to in the race in the end. But uh, they didn't have the advantage here that they have had in previous seasons. Brilliant lap to stick it on pole. But Max was always going to start 11th. That was as good as he was going to get, but he maximized that, no pun intended. Um, and in the race, I think he did what he could do. He was another driver where potentially could have gone onto a one stop. He potentially had the car and the opportunity, the same as George did, to do that. Um, but then when he committed to a two stop strategy, which I think um, Red Bull were in a different position to everybody else in that they didn't have a new set of hards; they only had the mediums. And I
Yeah.
think that their thinking was that, the mediums are more fragile anyway. To try and take them to the end of the race would have been too much. So it made sense to stop. But he kept Lando behind, and again, the characteristics of the track meant that he was able to keep Lando behind. But there was probably also a little bit of my usual Lando gripe, um,
Yeah, we'll come to
that
that
he
too.
just wasn't quite as aggressive in battle as he could have been.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think Red Bull did what they needed to do, right? They still came away for Max anyway, still opening up a bit of a gap to Lando. So I think from that regard, they did what they had to. But I think that what Spa showed was that this is not a car that's going to bludgeon the competition like they did. I mean, they needed rain to make that happen, and kudos to Max for putting the car on pole. And I came on to do our sort of our quality review and said this was not. So one of the questions I'd raised: do you think Max is actually going to make his way through the field as we've seen him do in the past 2 years? And the answer was, a decidedly no. I mean, he was no. I mean, you've seen in the past he started 14th on the grid, and within 5 laps he's in the race lead, and this was nowhere close to it. So I think what we saw again is a car that's very, very vulnerable, and you have to give it to Max and their strategy to some extent. They pulled those wonderful undercuts again on Norris that really kind of helped, Max kind of get up there. I thought the telling part was that towards the end of the race, Chaz, where he couldn't make an impression on Charles Leclerc, right? In the end, and with the DRS2. And you would think that if any car had the power to do that, yeah, under even this sort of restricted DRS, that we have now at Spa, I think he could have done it, but he couldn't even overtake Charles in the end, which was just amazing to me. Now, of course, he was on a medium tire that was far more worn than Charles, so I get it, but come on.
Well, track position, free air was king as
Yeah,
usual, wasn't it? So I think, like I said, the degradation characteristics of the track, the shortened DRS, and the fact these cars don't follow quite as well this season as they have done before just meant overtaking wasn't going to be as easy this season as it has been
yeah.
in the past. Very quickly, Sergio Perez, I
Oof,
thought he was going to do well. Started on the front row.
good God. I
I
mean, he had
mean,
a great
looked like a
qualifying session,
stone.
and yeah, amazing. I mean, he just struggled, right? I mean, for him to fall, I mean, he was just the exact opposite of what Max did, right? To climb. I mean, you couldn't have two cars doing more opposite things than the two of them. I thought that was a very disappointing race. I mean, for someone who came on the radio after qualifying and say, F them all, and it's like, okay, if you're gonna do that, then like
Yeah, have the
a
goods
little
in the
bit
race,
better,
right? But
like
there was just, yeah, it was
and
absolutely nowhere.
there's no
Uh,
reason he couldn't have beaten Charles, right? With the card that they had, he should have been on the podium. He really could have been on the podium. At least given how the race went. So that was really weird.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. What do we do? Let's move on to your guy now at McLaren, and you have something for Lando, I suspect.
Uh, well, Oscar did well on the Saturday, and he out qualified his more illustrious teammate. Actually, not more illustrious. Oscar's got more wins on the board than Lando, hasn't he, across his career? Yeah.
Yes, the sprint win. No, come on, don't do that. Look at you,
Um, but
low blows.
um, but yeah, I thought he drove a good race. Again, had the opportunity to go onto the one stop, as a lot of drivers did. But I think everyone kind of bottled themselves out of it, didn't they? Or talked themselves out of it and just said it's too risky. We're going to get overtaken, and didn't quite take into account the characteristics of the track. I think Pirelli had done the same thing, but um, his main error really was that pit stop at the end, wasn't it? Where he
Yeah, yeah.
overshot his marks. And however well his pit crew saved that, it was still a 4.4 second stop when everyone else was doing 2.3, 2.4s. And that 2 seconds might have been the difference between him getting past Lewis and not. But having said that, the same caveat applies that it was very difficult to overtake on this track. Um,
Yeah, but the
and
squabbling Mercedes would have given Oscar really that advantage, and they were a bit
I,
squabbly at the end. So,
yeah,
maybe there would have been team orders there at that point, but who knows?
yeah, maybe, but I think even with that, I couldn't see Oscar getting past those two. Even if he hadn't made that mistake. I
Yeah,
just think
maybe. Yeah.
with the way it all played out, it was just too difficult. Lando then got stuck behind Max, didn't he? In ostensibly a quicker car, so they paid the price, I think, for qualifying a bit lower down the order because of that. Um,
I'm not going to let McLaren off the hook for that.
no,
They got undercut not once but twice in the race. I mean,
yeah,
how do you not learn from the first time? Like,
yeah.
fine, you got undercut the first time. They should have been the one triggering the undercut the second time around. They were gonna go on the hard tire, more durable tire. Max only had mediums then, so I don't even understand what they're doing here. Like they
They're
really
making
costed Lando some points there because had it been switched, at least Lando would have come away making up a little bit of the difference in the championship. Like I don't understand what they were doing.
yeah. I think they're making a habit of this doing a doing a middle ground pit stop where it's too late to undercut, but it's too early to do a longer stint. Um,
If they
I
had
yeah,
Red Bull, they would have had the even if they stopped 2 laps earlier, it would have been fine. It would
yeah,
have been
you
fine. And
can
you knew, I mean, if you're a team, you knew that overtaking was hard. We already knew that by the time the last pit window opened, right? The second pit window opened, you knew that. So this is another head scratcher of a decision from McLaren because you got to put your driver on there. And look, Lando didn't quite have the same pace as he did in free practice. And we all thought that McLaren was going to be mighty in dry conditions, but they were far from it in that regard. But they could have helped themselves a little bit. I mean, Max was starting 11th, and for him to overtake you and finish ahead of you, like that's pretty
yeah,
bad.
yeah, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think now McLaren have to walk away, not feeling great about themselves, right? Because they've given up one, two, three, potentially 4 wins. I mean, you can put one of those down to Lando in Austria, but there are 3 occasions where they've kind of got their drivers out of sync and kind of given up a whole bunch of points. They could have been right there with Red Bull had they made better calls. But
Yeah, but I think the main thing for me here is that actually it's turning out that as we predicted, Oscar's really starting to come into his own. He's started to have a few really strong races, and I'd argue that actually, in terms of his decision making and his temperament, he's the driver that I would bank on getting a result
oh
more than I would
no.
Lando. Right now, I would
Okay.
100%.
We'll have to debate that on another day. I want to talk about Ferrari because
Sure.
we had a really good day. We had a really good weekend. Look, again, I'm not going to be here all excited, super overjoyed. Yeah, of course, I won the shirt and all that, but um, I thought they'd got the best they could have. I mean, for Charles to start on pole, we never knew that was going to be something he could hang on to. Ultimately, he does get to be on the podium, inherited by result of the disqualification. But I thought he drove an excellent race. And again, we've been not we, but there have been people, some people you know very well, that have been pointing a finger at him, pointing out all kinds of mistakes. But he ran a very good qualifying, pulled off a blinder. Yes, they had the new set of inters, and no one else did, but. Look, he did it, and then he came up pretty good, and he defended Max in the end, both Max and Lando at the end. I thought that was pretty good, really.
Yeah. I mean, his lap on Saturday was incredible, wasn't it? Not quite the fastest in the end,
No one
uh,
was, but no one was. No one was. I mean,
but
even before he did that, Max was ahead of Checo by like half a second anyway. So it's not like
yeah,
it's not like
yeah,
anyone else did.
yeah. I agree. I think Max pulled an absolute
Yeah.
blinder out on Saturday. But yeah, good qualifying lap, and again, good start, but got fortunate that there was a little bit of argy-bargy going on behind him, because that's not normally what happens. Perez is probably going to feel quite um, annoyed that second second year in a row, he's not been able to get the best result out of turn five at Spa. Um,
Yeah. Well,
but but uh,
sorry.
but but from there, Leclerc, yeah, as you say,
Yeah.
drove really well.
Well,
Sure, he got past, but yeah, he was. I don't think he was going to finish any higher than he did ultimately.
and I think that their Ferrari have a very interesting summer ahead of them, right? Because this is probably going to be crucial not just for rest of this year, but just for you to be interested next year too, right? Because
I'm always
it
interested.
seems like the development path they took wasn't the right one. They're kind of going back, and they're coming out with a new iteration. I heard that there would be some minor updates at Zandvoort, and then I don't know, maybe it's some later on. I think either Singapore or maybe afterwards. But this is going to be, I think, of all the four teams, Ferrari have something really, really crucial to kind of work out and see if they can get back ahead and get back in the mix with the other three teams and potentially come back to fighting for podiums and race wins. If not, how they come back from the summer is going to be really, 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 really interesting. They're my team to watch. Obviously, they're my team, but they're my team to watch going into the summer break. We'll talk more about that later, but yeah, that was pretty good. A shout out to Daniel Ricciardo, huh? That got scored points. Maybe a sign of things to come. Who knows? What do you think?
Uh, yeah, sure. I think that teammate war is getting closer and closer, isn't it? I think Sonoda um, got the
Uh,
early honors, and that I think is kind of
yeah,
kept Daniel out of the seat at Red Bull. But by the time he's started to find his feet, I think it's too late for him. If I'm honest, I think
it's too late.
yeah.
It's too late. It's too late. All right. And so on that note, we'll go ahead and end the session. There's a lot more coming out from us throughout the summer break. Uh, as always, please subscribe, please like, please comment. We try to read every comment. We respond to as many as we can. We appreciate everyone joining us along this madness route, and thanks for watching.
See you later.